Hi everyone. Welcome to the first talk of today on the front-end track. It's titled Web Apps Don't Need No Manual Testing. And we're going to dive into why that might be and learn some things along the way. My name is Hendrik. I like to refer to myself as a developer for fun, because having fun doing development work is what got me into this whole mess. Writing my first little programs and seeing that I can make things myself was super exciting and super fun. And I think web development and front-end development, for that fact, is super fun. That's why I'm in that. Usually I introduce myself as the consultant from Netlight, because I work as a consultant for Netlight at different clients. So my role description is a consultant, but I spend 5 days a week doing hands-on front-end development, usually React or React Native, also done some other technologies. But today that's not what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the why and how of end-to-end testing for web apps. So what I would like to do is to take you along a journey of some experiences I've made in projects of how people handle testing and handle automated testing, how that fits into their workflows, what we can learn from those experiences. And then in the second half of the talk, I want to introduce you to some technologies that we can use to automate the end-to-end testing of our applications while having fun, right? Because having fun is always a big part of all of this. But first of all, let's think about why do we do testing? For me, there's 3 big reasons. One is we want to find bugs before the user does. We'd rather have ourselves, our automation, or our testing department tell us that something is broken than a user angrily calling the hotline. Then the next part is we want to fulfill some sort of specification, right? So test-driven development is what comes to mind here. We want to write down in our tests what the software is supposed to do. And that comes back to the third point, which is helping future developers, right? By writing down through tests and other means, we want to tell future developers what the code is supposed to do, how it's supposed to behave, so they can understand it. And oftentimes, that future developer is myself next week, right? Because by then, I have forgotten all the stuff I wrote today. So that's the big things why we do testing. But actually, I think there's one more that I would like to explain to you by telling you a few stories. And I think we will see a narrative throughout those experiences I want to share. And from that, take some motivation to actually do more testing. So I would love to share some experiences I've had at different companies. And we're going to see these companies do these things. So once they're going to do meetings, and usually companies do meetings every 2 weeks, right? Because we do Scrum or something else, and we just end up with 2 weeks. We're going to do implementation work, so actual developers working on actual features. We're going to have manual testing involved in all of this, so a QA department or somebody else coming in, clicking through your application. And then we're going to have releasing, because at some point we need to hand over the software to the users. And I want to share with you a month in the life of certain companies or experiences I've made, with the goal of reaching something like this. So this is a month of me having a perfect month, right? The guy with the star eyes, that's me having a perfect day. And the reddish kind of things, those are meeting days. And we're going to have meeting days. We need them to communicate with our teammates. They're super important. They're not my perfect day, but they're super important, right? But for the rest of the month, I would like to have a perfect day. So we see here 4 weeks, in a month and 5 days, right? Just so you can understand the graphics. And then I want to share some experiences. So the first I like to call code freeze. So what happened here? This company released software on Sunday, then sat down to do some planning, right? Did a whole week or 2 weeks of development work, of sprint, then maybe some more development, and then something really weird happened, right? Where it turns blue at the end, they did code freeze. So ever since I shudder when I hear that word. But what that means is you stop working on any new features, on anything at all, basically, And especially in this context, it meant we would take a whole week of thoroughly testing the application manually, maybe some automation, but mainly manual testing, and developers would do bug fixing within this week. So that entire week was super weird. We just test the application, fix bugs. We wouldn't do any of that before. And how did they even end up there? It's actually quite understandable how we ended up here. I mean, nobody really liked the setup. It was all sorts of frustrating. We found so many bugs during that week, and we still shipped so many bugs. And the way we ended up there was that we shipped some bugs, and then we sat down and were thinking about, okay, how can we not ship bugs, right? And the first answer to that question is, well, we need to do more testing. We just need to find all the bugs before they happen, before they go to the customer. And then you sit down and you do more testing, and at the end you do an entire week of testing. And you still ship bugs. So I made another experience that looked a bit more like this. Here we would do some development work, some testing, some releasing, some development work, and then maybe 1 or 2 days of development work, and that again. So this was, I refer to this as manual releasing, so we still did manual testing, but we did smaller increments. We developed for smaller amounts of time, and then tested a little bit. And it turned out that in this experience that I made, we actually had to test less. We could find bugs better, and we shipped fewer bugs. And if we look at that in numbers, this is sort of how many days did we spend doing what in each of these scenarios. And in the first scenario, we spent 12 days developing, 5 days testing, 2 days meeting, 1 day releasing, and we made 1 release happen. In the second scenario, we did 14 days of development, 2 days of testing, 2 days of meeting, we did 2 days releasing, and we made 8 releases happen. And maybe at this point, the releases is already sort of an indication where we want to go. Because if we look at the bugs that we released, together with this and the releases, in the code freeze scenario where we did where we did extensive manual testing, we actually ended up shipping a lot of bugs. But when I made an experience where we split testing into smaller increments, did more releases, we suddenly had fewer bugs in production as well. And it actually turns out there's a system behind this. So in 2016, there was a study done, it's called the DevOps report. Once you get the slides down here in the lower corner, there's a link to the resource. And it actually turns out that there are high-performing organizations we can identify. So these are organizations that outperform their competitors in things like market share, employee retention, and just revenue. And it turns out these companies, they deploy 200 times as often, they have a 3 times lower change failure rate, and they recover 24 times faster from failure. And it even works the other way around. So if you are a company that deploys 200 times more often, recover 3 times faster from failures, or recover 24 times lower from failures and have a third of the bugs, you're usually a high-performing organization. So investing into going that way seems to even have economic value. And if I bring that back to my perfect month and what I would need for that, I could come up with the numbers for my perfect month, right? So in my perfect month, I would do 18 days of development. I would do 2 days of meeting, 0 days of testing or releasing, but I would do 200 releases with basically no bugs, right? And now the big question is, that's where we want to get to. How do we now get there with this information? And I think to get to this perfect month, we need 3 actors. We need developers who do development work, right? And who have fun. We need a computer. And we need some testers or maybe more quality assurance. Because what we will do all day long is the developer will be developing. The computer should be testing things, releasing things, testing things, releasing things, right? 10 times a day. And the quality assurance will spend their time not looking at the software, well, doing that every once in a while, but spending most of their time looking at the process and ensuring that this process turns out correct software. And the hard part here, I think, is the computer. or the one I want to talk to you about next is the computer, because here we need the right tools. We need tools that are reliable, that are usable, that are fun. And as with every job, you need the right tool for the right job. And if we look at the sort of testing that companies do, it turns out they do a whole different, like a whole bunch of testing automatically. So here are some keywords that might pop up, right? There's unit testing, there's component testing, there's API testing or integration testing, right? Different companies use different words. There's regression testing, and then there's this big thing that is end-to-end testing. And that's actually what we want to talk about. Because end-to-end testing is that piece in your whole collection of automated tests that is able to replace the manual testing. Well, to some extent, right? A manual tester will probably still find more bugs because they're human than a computer will. The computer will just find the bugs you already know are there, or were there at some point. But end-to-end testing is where you can ensure that the app works from the user's point of view, right? In the end, we want to deliver a usable, a working product to our end users. And for that, we need end-to-end testing. And I want to take the second half of my talk now to introduce you to a tool that was super fun to me. That's called Cypress. It's a tool for end-to-end testing. And we're going to use it today to take a look at a very simple website and how to test that to get an introduction. So this is a very simple web page. It has two functionalities. You can click a button to increment a counter down there. Right, that's like, yeah, okay, we can do that. And then it has a button to display a message that wasn't there before. And you click a button and the message appears. And that's just a very basic website. So if we look at the test cases that I just did, it's basically three. One is looking at the website, okay, it's a website, it's there. Then looking at the counter, clicking the button, maybe clicking the button twice, seeing that it increments, and then seeing that this message actually displays that wasn't there before. So I now want to walk you through how to do that in Cypress and then take you a few steps further. And this is how Cypress looks in action, and we're going to have a look at that. Yeah, beautiful background from Unsplash. So if I start this, you will see that it really fast went through all of this, right? And it's super fun because I can go in here and I can say, okay, well, it looked at some headline at some point. Okay, it visited a page, it found some element, it was there, okay, test the screen, nice. Then it found a button somewhere, oh, okay, it found a button, clicked on it, okay, found that count, it was one, nice, test screen. So this is a super fun experience for me already, right? I can go in, I can see the things that happened, I can go through this, and that's a super fun way of exploring why my tests failed and how I can improve them, because I visually see what was going on at the point in time where the test failed. Going back to the slides, you can also run... that slide doesn't want to follow its parent anymore. Okay, let me do this. You can also run this in any sort of CI environment, right? You can just get some console output. I don't think you can read anything, right? But it tells you what version it is running, what test it is running, if the test failed or passed, how many passed, and if they failed, it gives you more output. And if you want, it records screenshots and videos for you. So you can have that in your CI environment, run it, and then get a video of, oh yeah, your test case failed. And then that's it. Or some CI environments these days even allow you to like log into with a window so you can see what's going on. So how to use this tool? First, we need to do, okay, slide sync again. First, you need to do some setup. So for the setup, like any other test file you write, probably you've used, I don't know, Jest or Tape or anything out there. You will write a describe block of like, yeah, we want to be testing this. Then it should do something right in there. There might be, you know, CY is for Cypress, and then you do some things and you do some assertion, and maybe you only want to run the test below to get a faster feedback time, right? And to set all of that up, there's, of course, a config file. It's called Cypress JSON. And in there, the thing that you put is the base URL. You can put in more, but that's the thing you definitely put in there. So now you can always visit /, or you can like test your QA environment or your test environment or your local environment by just replacing that value, and you don't have to change your test cases as well. So let's walk through our 3 test scenarios, right? Basic rendering, the counter, and the message display. First is basic render, so something should have a headline. So you visit it on /, you check that it has an h1. So Cypress provides you a number of built-in commands. One is visit, one is get. Those are the 2 most important ones, right? Visit to visit a page, and get to get an element on the page. And get actually retries to get that element, but we'll come to that. And get also does a positive assertion for you. So the test is green if the element is there. The test is red if the element is not there. Then we could look at the counter. The first thing we might want to do is look that it starts at 0. So we get this data test ID count output. Okay, what's up with that? So data minus something, right, are custom attributes we can add to any HTML tag. And it's a good practice to add data minus test ID things to the things we want to test. That way we can decouple our testing from our usual development work, right? A different way to get an element could be any sort of identifier, IDs, classes, maybe even like nested paths. But by using a test ID, we can always exactly identify the element we want, and we decouple that from usual work, like, okay, this button is not a primary button anymore, but a blue button, the CSS class changed, and now all my tests break because that changed. To not have that happen, we can decouple it using the test IDs. And then we just check that that specific test ID we are looking for contains 0. Awesome. But then we want to click it, right? We want to see that it actually does something. So we again have a test ID to get the button, and then we can click it, and we can check that it's 1, and then we can click it again and check that it's 2, just to make sure that there wasn't some lazy programmer that just put in, okay, if something happens, put 1 all the time, and then the tests were green. This is also a very small example of one big difference between unit tests that you might be used to writing and these sort of end-to-end tests that you will be writing in Cypress. Because here, it is super okay to do big journeys. It's super fine to have one big journey that's like, okay, purchase should be able to add things to cart and purchase them. And like have all of that flow in one test. Because the time-consuming part of these tests is a lot in the setup. So it's super okay to have these bigger test runs. And then the next thing we want is the message display, right? So here we get to the part that get actually retries until an element is present. So this means that all the, as you would expect, all the current sort of JavaScript front-end frameworks that add things to the page, they're super testable with this. And it's much easier. With that, we will be leaving the basics behind, right? So now you can go through a page, you can interact with things, you can check what's in things, and that will actually already give you quite a good way of testing parts of your application. Cypress also provides you a lot of other built-in commands. So you can click on things, you can select things, you can type in things, you can get the value of things, you can invoke any function on any element. All these sort of things come built in. And what we saw so far, right, is looking at a few things, getting that up, having that nice window where you can go through basically how the test worked, what it did, what it found, where it broke. All of that you can usually get set up in half an hour. And write your first test that like visit your site and do the first few interactions. I had one automation QA tester at a client one point who was using Selenium before, which was a bit flaky when it came to test cases, and he was able to set up Cypress and the entire setup around it in half an hour and start to have fun writing his tests again. So let's look at some more deeper insights, something that goes beyond the basics. One is you can use previous values. So you can Maybe you don't want to check that you click and it's 2. Maybe you want to check that you click and it's 1 more than the value before. So here we come to other functions. So if you call cy.get, you get an element back that you can invoke functions on. And one of those functions you can invoke is text. So you get text back. If you used jQuery before, a lot of these functions you can invoke are sort of borrowed from that syntax. And then you can get the text. And with the text, you can later on calculate the number it was before and increment it by 1, right? You get the text in the then block. You find the button again. You click on the button. You find the output again. You check that the output contains the text that it was before plus 1. So super nice to sort of see that the page has right logic. The important thing here is Cypress returns a promise-like value. So it's like a promise in the terms that you have a .then on it and it's asynchronous, but it's not like a promise because you cannot await it and structure your code differently. There's libraries that integrate with Cypress that enable you to write await style code, but it doesn't come native. So if we want to do if we want to get multiple elements, we would need to nest then blocks. But so far my experience is that you don't want to nest more than 2 or 3 times, and then it still stays fine. If it becomes a problem, there's a few ways around it. One would be bring in a library that lets you await these things. But really what happens under the hood is that all the commands are scheduled with Cypress, and it then takes care of running them. Another nice feature we have is fixtures. This is a nice feature we can use. So you can have some JSON lying around on your in your repo, maybe some data somewhere that you want to check that it's on the website, maybe some user information, maybe a blog post example, any sort of bigger data that you don't want to have in your testing file, you can put it into a fixture and then read it from there, use it from there. And this becomes even more powerful if you combine it with mocking. So you can mock endpoints by just telling Cypress, hey, start up a server for me. Then, hey, on this route, I'll just give you some regex to find that route. Please serve this fixture. You can also have a function that returns something, but an easy way is to serve a fixture, so you can have a JSON file somewhere with the response in it. And once again, down here at the bottom, where my shadow is, there's links to the documentation on this, right? So you can read more on this. And then you visit a website that requests this resource you're now mocking, and that website will get the content. This is especially super nice if you want to test error scenarios, right? End-to-end testing means you're also talking to your server, but in some scenarios you might not want to do that when you have a super rare response that your server can't really mock for you or produce for you. Then you can just mock that response and see that when login fails, the error message is displayed. Those sort of things. If you run into the case that you're using a lot of fixtures, you can give them names, and then later on refer to them by names. There's only one caveat here to be aware of, and that is that in this context you have to use the function keyword instead of arrow functions, because you will otherwise be in the wrong context. So that you can stumble about, but just come back to this if you have enough fixtures to give them names. And then comes the real magic. So Cypress can do a request to your backend for you. What is super time consuming in automated end-to-end testing is login, right? Because imagine for each test case you want to have a fresh setup, maybe even a fresh user, right? So you click through the registration form, you click through the login form. The computer is fast at doing this, but it will still take 10 seconds. And then you have 100 tests, 200 tests, a few hundred tests. Each time's 10 seconds just to set it up. That's going to take a long time. So Cypress can do requests to your backend for you. You can give it a method, a URL, and then some body, like a username and password, maybe to log in your user. And then you can even do something with the response. What we might want to do is check that it's okay. We might want to get the ID and put it into local storage, because that's where our application expects to find it after login. And Cypress will at this point also set cookies for you. So if you have some authentication that relies on that, the cookies will be there for your test cases. But Cypress will also clear them between all your test cases. So if you want to log in, you need to do it before each test, otherwise your cookies will be gone. You can't have one session continue over multiple tests. But we can add a command to Cypress, a custom one. We could call it login, expect it to get a username and password, then call the code we saw on the last slide, and use this in before each blocks as just cy.login, here's my username, here's my password. And then we have a really nice way to abstract this. So you can add your custom commands for things that you usually do. Other custom commands, apart from login, that I find really helpful are things to configure your application. So we have one web app that is deployed for multiple tenants with different configurations, and we want to write tests that can test this application. So the web app exposes an API to our tests that enable the tests to enable a feature or disable a feature. And for that, we have a command that's just like cy enable feature, feature name, and we'll talk to the web app to do that. So with that, let's recap some best practices, or give you some best practices as well. One important thing when you do these end-to-end testing, these automated ones, you should consider what you want to end-to-end test. It doesn't make sense for everything. It definitely makes sense for the so-called happy path, or if your user can do the one thing they definitely want to do, and write bigger tests. Then I just gave the example, it might be useful to expose an API from your application for the tests, so the tests can do some configuration, tell the web app what it expects to see, or what it is that it wants to test now. Maybe also to initiate your state. Get doesn't need a positive assertion, it just does that for you. And you should definitely speed up your tests by logging in programmatically. And anything else you can think of that you could do programmatically, like any sort of setup, just do it with the cy.request. You will save a lot of time on this. And you can also use tasks and reporters. So tasks is Cypress's way of doing out-of-band operations, maybe something to set up the database or to tear something down. And you can use reporters. Cypress is built on Mocha. You can use any sort of Mocha reporters to get structured output. Maybe you want to get JUnit XML files out of this or something that can integrate with your existing infrastructure. And there's a link for you to more best practices. Cypress actually has a really good and fun to read documentation, because it's a tool that's super fun to work with. That being said, there is some caveats that we should be aware of. One is mocking fetch requests is actually still a bit difficult as of today. There is an ongoing merge request discussion to make this easier, but right now there's a recipe we can use. It's basically copying 50 lines of code and you're done. But it's not yet built in. As with any testing that you want to introduce, you might need to do more implementation work in your actual application to support the testing, right? To set up test accounts maybe, or to enable your tests to interact with your application in a certain way, to seed state or anything of the likes. Currently, it only supports Chrome. There's issue 310 to support more, but so far it's only Chrome. You have a bit of a danger of spaghetti code with the then blocks, but there's patterns for that. There's also the await helper library for that. And in the end, I think web apps really don't need no manual testing. Or do they? All things considered, I think the statement we can definitely make is web apps need automated testing, as all applications do. Because what we really want to achieve is fast cycle times. We want to do a lot of releases with few bugs and have fun developing. And the only way to do that is to invest into automated testing. And also to invest into end-to-end testing. Manual testing, we probably need more like quality assurance. Something that looks at our process and that every like 5th or 10th release looks at the release in depth and it's like, okay, this works. I'm pretty sure the process that produced this will produce valid software in the future. That, I think, is where we need to get to. And I think Cypress is a super fun tool to get there. I hope I could motivate you all a bit for that. Here's some resources for you, and that's the end. And as Martin said in the panel, I will be open for some questions. And we might even have a microphone. So if you would like to ask a question, just raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you.
Yes, I would be interested in how and if it supports testing on native devices.
Not really that well.
Okay.
But that's a really interesting question where I would like to take a little detour on, and that is, it has this limitation currently on Chrome for the desktop, also for the mobile, but I think it's the argument I've always made for this is it's better to have a tool that the developers really work with, that's still improving, that can give us more certainty that we will do testing, than have a tool that's super clunky and hard to use where everybody will just be cursing about it. Because it will still give us the scenario where we have not tested on everything, but we have really good tests on the things where we can do it. I think will still give us better results. Yeah.
My question is, how do you integrate your tests into your build process, or do you at all?
Yeah, also a really good question. So I focused more on why should we use the tool and a bit how to use the tool, but there's really interesting questions around this, right? Like end-to-end testing, what's actually the good thing to end-to-end test, how to integrate this into your pipelines. For the pipelines, there is two answers I would like to give you. One is, in my ideal world scenario, my end-to-end tests would, through parallelization or other ways, run so fast that I can just run them in front of every release and actually for each merge request. But in practice, oftentimes they take too long. And I would really like to just set them up so they have to run before each release, and sometimes that's possible. Sometimes you can build in something so you test before you release, and then you have a way around the tests if you want to do a really fast release to hotfix something. Also, in the ideal world scenario, we will build up an entire environment with the backend and test in there. But that usually isn't the case, so I would always argue to be pragmatic about this. Having end-to-end tests automated helps you a lot in gaining reliable results out of your development process. So whichever way you can integrate that will help a lot. And if that way is, okay, 4 times a day we run the automated tests against the testing environment, maybe that's a starting point. Don't let yourself get down or demotivated by the fact that you won't be able to integrate it perfectly into your CI at first. Okay, there's some in the front.
Yeah, how far do you usually go with the end-to-end testing? Do you only do functional testing, like you said in the talk, or do you also do like visual testing? Is this button the correct shade of blue? Is it the correct size?
So far I usually haven't done that sort of testing of the visual parts. You could of course take a screenshot and then have some tool compare the screenshots, or find a different way to do that. But so far I haven't gone that deep.
Okay. So I was wondering if Cypress actually exposes an API to query CSS things about an HTML element, for example.
I think you would well, you have basically all of JavaScript in the browser to get things about an element, right? So you can get the color of the thing, you can get the computed color of the thing. and then compare that to some sort of snapshot or maybe something you have in your tests. There's no built-in more sort of high-level support for that sort of testing that I'm aware of. But you can also take screenshots and then work with those.
You talk a lot about the caveats of Cypress, but what was the biggest problem you had with Cypress? Like, what was the thing that you said, oh, it's impossible to do?
There haven't been that many. One thing that was frustrating at some point, we used some Maps API, and we wanted to mock that out using Cypress. Cypress allows you to mock out libraries that you have, and that just wasn't working. And we solved it in the end by wrapping that dependency inside a service and then mocking that service. And we were really stuck with that for like 2 days.
Okay, and one more. What if I have a really complicated registration process, like I need to put a SMS code or something, like a lot of forms? Would you rather use Cypress or another service to register account and then use Cypress?
I think if you have a complex flow like that, for testing, you will have to come up with some way around that complex flow. So flows like, okay, I need to look onto my phone now to get the SMS code, or I need to look onto my emails now to get the activation link. Usually for these end-to-end testing, you need to enable a different way to doing that for your testing. So either your tests go to some specific testing endpoint, or directly to the database, or some way around that, because you will not be able to do these super complex flows where you need information that you will receive out of band. Because getting that out of band information is really complex if your backend doesn't expose the specific API to get that for testing.
Okay, thank you.
I know another tool, Selenium, and there are difference between Selenium and Cypress.
So for me, the biggest difference is Selenium is super flaky and I don't want to work with it, and Cypress is super fun and I want to work with it.
Okay.
To be honest, I didn't have that much experience with Selenium before I started on this tool. So I'm a bit too young to answer that question. But if you're super interested, I could point you towards some people that can tell you about their experiences. Okay, any more questions? Well, I will be around for a bit. If you have any other questions, you can still find me. Please use the website to give me some feedback. That would be much appreciated, so the next talk can be better. Thank you so much. Have a great conference.